Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. Next week, a United States House task force is going to hold another hearing on UAP. It's going to feature some military veterans who had either encounters with UAP or know of UAP encounters that the military has had. So that should be very interesting. But I think what's even more interesting is the fact that George Knapp, the legendary investigative journalist, is also going to be there to testify on things that he knows. Of course, we all know George did a lot of his investigations started in the 1980s on this subject. He's been always interested in it. He's been talking about it for decades now. Now he's part on the Weaponized podcast along with UFO investigator Jeremy Corbell. Very successful podcast, very entertaining podcast, very informative podcast. They talk about whistleblowers and disclosure efforts all the time on there. Of course, George also is the person who brought us Bob Lazar back in the late 1980s. Bob Lazar, of course, was the engineer who worked at S4, which is an offshoot of Area 51 there in Nevada. He said that he was helping to reverse engineer recovered extraterrestrial craft. There were 9 of them that he said were there. He worked on one that he referred to as the sports model. He came public in the late 1980s because he felt that if he didn't, something might happen to him. He felt it was safer to go public, and he felt this way, well, maybe they won't touch me now because it would look really suspicious if they did. So George Knapp is, this is the kind of guy that George Knapp is. He's been bringing this kind of stuff to us for a long time. So it should be very interesting to hear him testifying at this hearing next week. Actually, this was put together by Anna Paulina Luna. Here's a little segment from an article that was in The Hill. It says, UFO Task Force on Government Transparency will hold a hearing next week on unidentified flying objects, or UFOs, also known as unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAP. Actually, it's unidentified anomalous phenomena. It's been changed. When are these people going to get the memo? Anyway, and here was a direct quote from Representative Anna Paulina Luna, who chairs the House Oversight and Government Reforms Task Force on the Declassification of Federal Secrets. She stated, "The American people deserve maximum transparency from the federal government on sightings, acquisitions, and examinations of UAPs and whether they pose a potential threat to American safety. Whistleblowers who provide details on spending information and policies and procedures regarding the classification and declassification of UAP should be able to do so without retribution." Some of the people that are going to be there, in addition to George, is going to be a former Air Force vets, Jeffrey Nuccetelli and Dylan Borland, as well as a Navy veteran, Alexandro Wiggins. Now, on Reddit here, Wiggins was on the Weaponized podcast. He's someone who says in 2023 he was on the USS Jackson when he encountered a Tic Tac UFO. Here was a quote from him: "I've never witnessed that ever in my life." Navy Chief Alex Wiggins was just announced as a witness for the upcoming UFO hearing. Wiggins was stationed aboard the USS Jackson in 2023 when the ship encountered a Tic Tac UFO. So Wiggins will be talking about that. This other guy we're going to have here, Dylan Borland, a former Air Force, he says, I don't know much about this guy here. He's a witness for the next hearing, but he worked for almost 3 years for the Air Force as a geospatial intelligence analyst, almost 4 years for BAE Systems, an aerospace company, as an intelligence analyst, and almost 6 years for Intrepid Solutions and Services, LLC. Here's what people are saying here in UFO Reddit about this guy. Someone says, "I wonder if Grush brought him in. Grush worked in the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency." And someone responded saying, "Of course he did." Burleson, they're talking about Eric Burleson, another member of the UAP caucus, said in the Twitter space that he basically followed the names on the list that Grush gave to him. "This is why we won't hear from Jay Stratton, because Grush didn't put it on the list." And let's see what else people are saying. Someone else here on Reddit states, "With that resume, I think it's reasonable to hope or expect that he might have some new information to share beyond a single sighting. There's definitely been innuendo around BAE being involved in reverse engineering efforts." One of the other ones is Jeff Nuccetelli, and he talks about, he was actually on a podcast here, recently merged podcast. Here's a little clip from it where he's talking about contractors, Boeing contractors at Vandenberg Air Force Base in 2003, who saw a craft that was the size of a football field silently floating over the launch pad, red in color and glowing. Here's a little clip. About
8:45 in the morning, the dispatcher gets a call from range control, a technical sergeant from range control. And he says, I'm reporting an event that occurred at LF-21 and LF-10, two different sites in the same location. And what he said was the contractors working on site called range control, and he said there was a gigantic floating red square over LF-21 at low altitude. And they were just standing there watching this thing.
A red square. So
red square.
One thing that people have asked me after I spoke about this case at the hearing was, what does that mean, a red square? Right? Was this a cube? Did it not look like it had depth, and so it's described as a square? I said square in the hearing because that's how it was described to me, just as you described it. And I'm curious if you have any additional details that you could add. Was it a three-dimensional object? Did it just appear to be a square, and it just couldn't tell?
So here's the issue. I had the original statement from the contractors. There were three contractors that worked for Boeing that saw this object, and they wrote sworn written statements. I've lost those. I lost them in 2012. I have some other statements, but those are indirect witness statements from it. But from my recollection of reading the documents, to the best of my recollection, it was a somewhat flattened square plane, and basically just a big square object.
All right. So we have that. So that was an incident that happened in 2003. So they're going to be talking about these kind of things. So that should be very interesting. It should make for a very interesting hearing. And I do hope to, I do plan actually on, I'm going to live stream it that day. And I'll probably start a little bit earlier as long as there's no issues I have. I'm sure I'll be live streaming it that day. As long as there's no technical issues. I mean, sometimes that does happen. But, yeah, I do plan on doing that and also commenting on it as it in the beginning. And if there's any, dead space as it goes on, I'll provide commentary there as well as after the fact. But as I've been talking about recently, all of this, right? I mean, this is my opinion these days. I can't help it anymore because I think all of this is just, what we're seeing here, all of this is just the slow disclosure. This is what it is. We're seeing a slow disclosure. You have people coming up talking about military vets seeing, or Boeing contractors seeing weird objects in the sky. That's all this is. It's just to keep this in the public consciousness. Congress is holding these hearings, talking about these things. They're not talking about the beings or why they're here. They're just talking about people seeing them and the dangers that they might pose to other aircraft in the sky. Things like that. We're not getting into the things that I've been talking about on this show. And I think that the reason is, as I've been saying, is because it is too much. It's too much for people, there's billions of people on this planet, right? A lot of them don't think about this subject, and all of a sudden you're throw on them alien abductions, cattle mutilations, all these things are really happening, it's all really true, alien implants, all these kind of things. They sound scary. It is scary, right? So I think that this is the government's effort. What we're seeing here is for years now, and that's what it has to be, right? I mean, we have evidence now in the public domain, right, that shows that aliens are real, that there is no question about it, a non-human intelligent presence here, but nobody's really talking about the implications of that. You hear some people like the attorney, the whistleblower attorney, Danny Sheehan, of the New Paradigm Institute. Like, that guy's running around a lot. He'll tell you some of the hard facts with regard to this, but outside of that, you don't really get it from the people going and talking in front of a microphone during a congressional hearing. You're hearing more about just objects. Now, we'll see what George Knapp's going to provide. Now, I have a feeling that these guys are just going to talk. The guys, these military vets, are going to talk about their experiences or the things that they learned as when they were in the military of encounters with UFOs. That's basically that's like the light side of this whole phenomenon, really, isn't it? I mean, seeing a UFO from a distance, perhaps, or maybe close up, whatever, right? But that's we're not getting into the alien abductions, the purpose of the aliens, why they're here, what they could possibly be doing, the possibility that there are what do you call them, hybrids living among us, basically half alien, half human creatures are mingled in here among us, that they were created out of this abduction program, right? We're not hearing any of that stuff because that's too heavy, way too heavy for most people, I would have to imagine, and that is why we're seeing this slow disclosure. That's what we're getting these days, folks, and that's just my opinion at this point. Because I don't know why. Like I told you, like I stated before, the Vegas case. I mean, there's no question about it. I know I talk about it all the time, but it proves it. I mean, I know that I get some comments here and there from dummies who say that they see there's absolutely nothing here that convinces them. Well, that's stupid. I mean, I don't know what else to say about it, right? The bottom line is it proves it. There's something here, more so than anything you're going to see in the halls of Congress, more so than anything that you're probably going to see anywhere else, right, for the most part. I mean, outside of some of the incidents like the Ariel school incident, which you can't deny that, right? You can't deny that. Over 60 kids, right? You can't deny that. You can't deny the Turkey UFOs. There was experts from all over the world that, verified that, right? There's no question about it. We're not alone. There's something here, and they're up to something. People get abducted, and it's been going on for a long time. So that's what we're going to get, and it's fine. And I think that's fine. If this is the way it's going to be, this is the way it's going to be. We just got to deal with it. I know a lot of us out there would rather just get the full truth from the government already, but they're doing this slow walk. That's what all of this is about. And also now there's talk about some new whistleblower protections. There was a UAP Whistleblower Protection Act that was recently introduced by Representatives Tim Burchett and Anna Paulina Luna recently. That's something else that they're starting to talk about too. Here was an article from DefenseScoop.com that we'll get into right now. House lawmakers are reviewing new legislation that would codify distinct protections for whistleblowers who disclose information about any use of United States government funding to study unidentified anomalous phenomena material or matters associated with objects observed in airspace or sea domains that cannot be immediately explained. From UFOs to modern and transmedium UAP, the government has a complicated history in terms of its handling of reports about craft that appear to transcend the capabilities of existing technology and records documenting related incidents. Yes, let me just stop there. Yes, it does have a complicated history. They've been lying about it for decades, ever since at least Roswell, right? Ever since then, since 1947, no question. It's a complicated history. They don't know what to do in government about this because they can't control it. That's what it is, folks. It's out of their control. If you're like, say, you're the Department of Defense, how do you defend against something you don't even understand, right? Something that's technologically superior to anything that we have here. I mean, how do you don't want to talk about that. You don't want to talk about weakness, about potential weaknesses. That's another thing here that people need to think about. Anyway, it goes on here. It says, but efforts to compel more transparency and oversight have continued to emerge in recent years, largely due to mounting public pressure and mandates from Congress. The UAP Whistleblower Protection Act, introduced last week by Representatives Tim Burchett and Anna Paulina Luna, marks the latest move by lawmakers to help shield people who want to share information with Congress but fear retaliation and motivate more of them to come forward. A member of Burchett's team told Defense Scoop in an email that the bill is identical to legislation put forward in November during Congress's last session. If passed, they said it would ultimately add provisions for individuals to report on the use of taxpayer funds to evaluate or research UAP to existing whistleblower protection statutes. This version of the bill was referred to the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, Armed Services, and Intelligence for consideration. Burchett and Luna are among a small cadre of policymakers who have been steadily prioritizing whistleblower hearings, public engagement sessions, and other legislative efforts to promote more accountability and disclosure from the intelligence community, Department of Defense, and other agencies regarding UAP. On Wednesday, Luna announced a hearing on restoring public trust through UAP transparency and whistleblower protection that's officially set for September 9th. The Committee on Oversight and Reform's task force on the Declassification of Federal Secrets, which she chairs, will host the event next week. Blah, 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 blah. Basically a lot of the same stuff I was just talking about. So, yeah, there's all these things going on, but here it comes back to this, to me, for me, right? I don't even know why, when you really think about this, right? Why do we need UAP Disclosure Act? Why isn't Congress being informed about this? I obviously, somebody who's in control, the people we elect, or some shadowy group that's standing back in the shadows, jealously guarding the secrets with regard to UFOs and aliens. Like, who's in charge here, really? What doesn't the president have any power whatsoever when it comes to this? You have to ask yourself these questions. This is all like theatrics to me. All of this is just like a big show. It's like Shakespeare, in the park or something, right? That's what it seems like to me. All of it. It's just a slow disclosure, and it might be the right thing to do. I don't know. I don't like it. I'd rather just, everyone know what the truth is, and that's it, and we move on from there, not this little piecemeal stuff. But that's what it is. This is just the situation we're in. You got to accept that and just, continue studying this anyway. I don't know what else to say about it, but it does. I don't like it in a way, but in another way, I do understand it. So I guess that's where I'm at with that. Anyway, moving on, I want to talk about another crazy encounter that happened in the teens, back in the 1910s, rather. And this is another one from Finland. I was talking just recently. I did a show about an incident that allegedly occurred in Finland in 1914, where there was a grandmother and her grandson that saw this sphere come down from the sky after an apparent eclipse. And in that sphere, there were 2 alien creatures in it, and it was just floating around. And the grandmother seemed to know a lot about it and said that they're here to help humanity or something to that effect. I did a show about this recently, and here was another one posted by the same person who posted the other one. This guy has been posting stuff on the subreddit Humanoid Encounters on Reddit. He goes by the handle Johan Harry. He's doing this multi-part series on here where he's providing different reports that he's collected from various sources. He has part 15 on here. It's about humanoid close encounter cases from the Nordic countries. And here was another one from the 10s, from 1917, right? I mean, so this is 30 years before Roswell, 30 years before Kenneth Arnold, right? It's very interesting. And it was an early abduction case. In this situation here, the last one we were talking about, it was just basically a sighting of a craft with humanoids in it. But in this one, this woman there was a woman that went missing for a few days, and then she returned and said she was taken away by devils. She didn't know how else to describe it, I guess. I mean, what else would you be thinking back in 1917, right? Anyway, it says here, an early abduction case from the beginning of the 20th century. And actually, I figured out how to say some of these words here, because I'm sure I butchered a lot of the pronunciations last time. But this one here is Yrjönvaara, okay, Northern Karelia in Finland, and later on it became part of Russia. It was at this point in time, this section of eastern Finland was in Finland, but now since it's become part of Russia. It says here, the abduction case was first mentioned in the newspaper Korki Lainen, which is mainly read by persons who formerly lived in the little community of Kirkijoki in Finnish-speaking Northern Karelia, nowadays a territory of Russia. This was a short article written by the signature Leidomayan Eino in number 23 of Kirkijolainen. Kirkijolainen, or however you say. Now the pronunciation's all butchered again. But anyway, it says here, the author tells a story from the time just before Finland declared independency from Russia. Annie, a middle-aged widow, was living in her little house in Yrjönvaara, about 6 kilometers or 3.7 miles to the west of the Kirkijoki church. She disappeared for some days, and the villagers thought she had gone to visit her daughter, but when she came back, she had an amazing story to tell. When Annie came home, there was a large machine in front of her house, and strange beings were walking on the ground nearby. And then he has an artist interpretation here, which I think is very nice. You could see this little creatures there, and a big giant flying saucer next to a house. And then there's the woman there standing there checking it out. And then the article goes on and says, a large machine like a big metal wash basin had landed beside her house, and from it, small beings, which Annie later called devils. They came down a ladder. Somehow she could understand a little of their language. She was not willing to follow them, but she was taken aboard by force, and they traveled very fast. Everything in the world was shown to her, and there was a lot of wonder. The machine's metal was shining inside, and it made no noise as in the train. Annie told that the devils flew her over the world and even between the stars. Annie retold her stories many times for people in the community, but everybody said that she had a fever and hallucinated or was just dreaming. But Annie did not agree. And this author of this article speculated that it could have been the machine was a UFO and the devils could have been humanoids. And then here's another another CGI image that the Johan Harry provided for this article. It says the beings, as Annie perceived as devils, took her on a fantastic voyage, and she saw many wonders. Let's check it out. Here's the woman on a spaceship with 2 little creatures. Then the article continues a further investigation. That first article was from 1978, but then in the late 80s there was another article. And it says, because of the first article, one of the investigators in the UFO research of Finland, he located and interviewed a Mrs. N.N., who was born in 1910, who was a little girl and one of Annie's neighbors when this event took place. During the years that followed Annie's experience, she had often told about it in N.N.'s home, so Mrs. N.N. could remember all the details. Annie's full name was Annie Latoux. She was born in 1873 and died in 1930, and she was not a widow, even if it is probable that she lived alone. Actually, her husband, Juho, died 11 years later than herself. Mrs. N.N. recollected that Annie was always alone when visiting the other villagers, so it was quite natural that N.N., as a little girl, took her for a widow. She lived in a little house on the eastern shore of the Kankanlampi Lake in the village of Alho. The event took place, according to Mrs. N.N., between January and Easter in 1917. Annie was doing her everyday work when the machine, which she described as wash basin shaped, the usual wash basin in those days was like a big soup plate. Let me just stop there for a second. Yes, it's basically one of those big, it looks like a big bowl that they would have a pitcher inside. You dump water in it, you wash your hands or wash your face or whatever with it. Like a flying saucer, basically. That's what she was describing. It had ladders by which Annie was taken aboard against her will. Inside the craft, there were a lot of small men who were moving around quickly. Annie never spoke of their clothes, and it seems that she did not have any ideas of what the small men wore. As the religious people in the village thought they were devils, Annie accepted this fact and later called them that whenever she retold the story. Mrs. N.N. comprehended from Annie's story that there had been a leader with which Annie communicated, perhaps by telepathy. Annie had been several days inside the craft. They had cruised around the world and near the stars. Annie was also asked to stay, but she did not want to. Inside the craft, it had been conveniently warm and the seats were comfortable. Finally, Annie was brought back to the same place as she was taken from, i.e., from the road outside her house. The other villagers thought that Annie had a fever. Her house was very cold during the winter, and her experience was only fever dreams. Annie never accepted this, and it seems she spoke of it quite often because she could not understand what had happened to her during those days. Well, let me just stop there. I think I can understand what happened to her in those days. I think that she was abducted by aliens and taken on a trip for some reason. Who knows what they were doing? Maybe it was some, there's probably things they were doing to her that she doesn't even know, doesn't remember, because they probably erased it from her memory. But they showed her a good time, and then they finally dropped her off, and then she was just telling her story to all these people in the villagers, all the way up probably till 1930 to when she passed away. Yeah, there were some parts of the story which were unclear. Like, I don't even think it matters. One story said she was a widow. The other story says no, she wasn't a widow, and her husband didn't die until 11 years after she died. All of that stuff is really insignificant. I think the story here is, if it's real, I don't know how someone back in those days would make up a story like this. If she was really telling all these villagers this kind of a story back in 1917, it sounds very, very familiar to stories that we would hear in decades later, right? A lot of people have talked about encountering these beings, short beings. She thought they were devils. What else would somebody think back in 1917 if they're little tiny creatures come out of a flying saucer that's landed near your house and just grab you and take you on the craft, and you don't want to get taken away? What else could it possibly be? It was obviously some sort of a non-human intelligent presence there that was responsible for this. That's what it was. Probably extraterrestrials. But it's all par for the course. It sounds like the similar kinds of abduction stories that we would come across years later. There's so many different stories, like the Carl Higdon story, where he was taken off the planet, and he believed that he was out in space and he was being taken to, and this was something that happened in the 70s. He was a hunter out hunting, and he encountered an alien creature, and it brought him on board against his will, and they're going to keep him, but apparently they decided not to keep him in the end, and they brought him back to Earth. Is this one of the same kind of scenarios here, possibly? Sounds like it. Sounds crazy, really, but then again, but what are you going to do? I mean, these stories do sound crazy. Unfortunately, it's real a lot of times. Now, we can't prove this one. A lot of these stories are all anecdotal, right? What are you going to do? But the bottom line is that we do have enough evidence now to conclude that these kind of things could have been happening back in 1917 in Finland. because we know that these creatures are real. We've seen them. We have evidence now of them. There's all sorts of evidence in all different forms. There's physical trace evidence. There's film evidence. There's video evidence. There's the testimony of tens of thousands, right, of different people who have encountered UFOs and or the beings. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, right? We have cattle mutilations. That's evidence. We have alien implants. That's most certainly evidence, right? There's tons of evidence here, but yet, some people just can't believe it because it's just so incredible. Anyway, I want to say this. I want to say thank you all for joining me today. Until next time.